Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why you see so many powerlifters focus more on their triceps than on their pecs. And when I state that, I don't want that to be seen as a universally true statement, because there are certainly guys who do extra pectoral work to bring up their bench press. There's plenty of guys who do it, but you generally see a bias in the direction of more additional tricep work than you do more pec work. And I think that's a fair statement, that there's a bias in that direction. If you were to look at a lot of really, really strong lifters, overall training volume as far as smaller movements go, or a lot of supplemental work, you're going to see they do generally more volume for triceps than for pecs. So a lot of people would say, well, why is that? Isn't that just for the equipped guys? Isn't that just for guys who wear a bench shirt because the shirt helps them lift hundreds of pounds extra out of the bottom? Well, not necessarily. There's plenty of 700-pound raw bench pressers out there. Well, there aren't that many. Who, when you look at their training, they're always doing tricep work. There's plenty of videos out there of Eric Spoto doing one-arm tricep exercises. Okay, did plenty of it. And you don't ever see a really, really strong bencher without big triceps. And you have guys like me who struggle with the bench, and I'm having to do tons of tricep work now because my triceps are lagging. Bench is my weakest lift, and I'm not a small guy anywhere else. So again, even it's a lesson I've had to learn. So the question becomes, why? Why do they do that? Why not just more pressing, more chest work, things like that? Well, I think a lot of it makes sense when you start looking closely at a lot of the EMG data and stuff out there. And I'm not saying EMGs are the be-all, end-all, but that data gives us a reference point to understand why so many successful powerlifters do that. And we know originally the equipped world, which at one time was all of powerlifting, thing I think people forget. There was a time where there was no raw powerlifting. Now, their shirts and squat suits were not as effective as the modern ones are. Not by a stretch, right? They didn't get nearly as much out of them. But there was a time where that was just powerlifting, right? Any suit that was meat legal was meat legal. So that certainly influenced everything, and a lot of people would say, aha, well, that's why, because they're more worried about the lockout strength. Well, triceps matter at the bottom. Believe it or not, your triceps do matter still at the bottom. We could argue that as you get higher up, the triceps versus chest, in terms of the work they have to do, relative to their joint angles, increases, but the triceps still matter at the bottom. Of course they do. So, what's going on here? Well, look at the EMG data. What do we usually see on most presses, most chest presses, with the EMG data? Because this is something that gets distorted when we compare novices to more advanced guys. You look at the data and you start finding that chest activation tends to be much, much higher than relative tricep activation on big multi-joint movements. And how do we define that? Well, if you compare them relative to smaller exercises. In other words, if you take a smaller tricep movement that's more tricep dominant and you do limit sets with it, you usually get quite a bit more EMG activation than a bench press, a closed grip bench press, an incline bench, right? Even dumbbell presses, right? All these various chest presses, when you look at the data, they don't hit the triceps as hard as we might like them to. Now, some people would argue, well, does that mean triceps don't matter for the lift? Well, no, the triceps do matter for the lift. The issue is that development's not proportionate. Because if muscle activation's not proportionate, it means if you're just doing the minimum volumes, if you're on a relatively low volume training program, which is normal for a lot of powerlifters, and you're doing the minimum effective volume to see good growth in your chest, your triceps probably aren't getting enough stimulation. Right? You guys watched me do that for years. Just do pressing, pressing, pressing. It's like, I don't handle my triceps. I did some tricep work. Not like I do now. And it's exactly what you see. You end up seeing underdeveloped triceps relative to other muscles. Relative to other muscles. So it has to do with the fact that the pecs just work harder. The front delts work harder on almost all of your presses in terms of muscle activation. And like we said before, training volume and loads matter. I mean, if you do enough work with a movement that doesn't hit a muscle as effectively as you might like, you'll still get there. But you have to do more work. The problem is that for a more advanced lifter, getting enough work in is going to end up chewing your shoulders and stuff up. It's hard to get enough pressing work to really work your triceps effectively off of these chest-based exercises. It's hard. Beats your shoulders up, beats connective tissue up to do that much hard work. It can be problematic. For the novice, that's not the case, because people are like, but didn't you say that in novice lifters there are studies that show that adding tricep work doesn't add any tricep mass? Yeah, there are. There are studies that looked at that and found that if enough training volume and progressive overload is there on the bench press, that novice lifters who just do enough bench work, their triceps grow just as effectively as other group who adds tricep extensions to the bench press. Right? Adding the extensions for them doesn't give any more growth. Why? Because novice lifters don't need much work to grow. And the bench press is a big movement that works the tricep through most of its range of motion as a primary mover. Okay. They have a very, very low minimum effective volume to see muscle growth. Novices also don't have a lot of work capacity. So in your untrained lifters, it doesn't help. And the studies confirm that. Like that's not my opinion. As we get more advanced though, minimum effective volume to make a muscle grow goes up rapidly. And as you get stronger, your ability to do work on some of the biggest movements starts to become tedious. It becomes taxing. It becomes hard. And I mean hard from a recovery perspective, an injury perspective. And simply put, if you're doing tons of chest pressing, you're probably just not getting enough tricep work to maximize their development. And here's what it comes down to. When you're dealing with an exercise like the bench press that is very muscle oriented, there's very, very little structural help here. This is not a big structural exercise. We know based upon all the research out of the big three, the bench press is actually most heavily correlated with body weight and muscle mass. Squat right behind it, deadlift last. Deadlift is just not as affected as much by body weight or muscle mass. That's why you have guys who outpull world record holders in a weight class above them. Sometimes, right? A lot more leverage involved. Even though I feel it's the best test of brute strength. Still a lot more leverage. Bench press is more about muscle mass. Muscle mass matters a lot more. The bigger you can get your pecs and your triceps, and particularly the mid-pec, the front delt, the lateral and medial heads of the tricep, the more you're going to be able to bench. Okay? The bench press is very, very muscle oriented in terms of what you can move on it. I'm not saying all lifts aren't, it is just more dependent on a ratio basis. So if you have a muscle like the triceps that are a primary mover and they're not getting enough stimulus to maximize their growth, or at least a half of the tricep you care about the most for the bench, then you're going to shortchange your bench press and you're not going to have an amazing bench press. And the few people who don't have big triceps, they're a bit of an aberration. They're a statistical anomaly. There's a reason we do the extra tricep work. Right? There's a reason. I'm not saying some people don't need extra chest work, they do. But not everyone does. What you do find, though, is that a hell of a lot more lifters seem to need more additional tricep work. And it just has to do with the stimulus that you're getting from your training and the lifts that you're doing relative to the amount of volume that you need to cause that muscle to grow, right? And the thing to remember again is that the longer we've been training and the bigger we get, the harder it is to make a muscle grow. The higher the effective volume becomes and workload becomes in order to make that muscle break through a plateau. So yeah, there comes a point where a lot of extra tricep work becomes enormously valuable for the powerlifter for their bench. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.